We're here at the Hilton Waikoloa speaking with Todd Richmond from the University of Southern California after his keynote presentation on the future of virtual reality, augmented reality, and many other things. Thank you, Todd, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I was surprised, not being familiar with the system sciences, about the relationship of the future of VR and AR to the researchers and scientists who are focusing on that, and how it may play a role in the management of data and other things that they're working with.
Well, I think that it is a new medium, right? So VR, AR, mixed reality, these immersive mediums, just like the cell phone and then just like the internet. If you're thinking from a system science perspective, the internet changed the way that people thought about systems and networks and how you do information exchange. When mobile came out, it was the same sort of impact. People had to rethink infrastructure and rethink the way that things interacted. So this really is the third wave of now a new communication medium, and on the back end, all of this big data, all of these things that we're collecting from sensors, we're going to have to make sense out of it, and it's going to have to be exposed to a human. And the immersive technologies, VR, AR, mixed reality, is a window into that.
Because there's been so much hype in the past year in particular about VR and AR, and the growth of the cardboard devices, the Oculus devices, and Facebook's acquisition, is there a concern that people will begin to think that this will solve all of our problems or give us new opportunity to exploit the technology, and then when it doesn't fulfill it, that they will, in that disappointment, retreat rather than advance?
I think you see boom-bust cycles in all sorts of technology adoptions. Part of the challenge is now we live in a 24/7 news cycle, and we've got all of the social media that sort of amplifies the hype. So the hype cycle right now around VR is huge, and CES is going on right now. All of these things are being announced. Last year, I was there at CES. We had some VR stuff in the booth. I was with IEEE. And the challenge is that the hardware is getting there, it's getting distributed, more and more people are experiencing it, but the content is honestly not that compelling, because the content is hard to generate. We don't really have a language for doing that. Our old models break, narrative breaks, so we really have to figure out how we're going to create compelling experiences. That takes time and experimentation, and the population is kind of impatient. We expect good stuff. We're used to good movies, we're used to good music, we're used to good phones now. So I think there's going to be some impatience. People will get in, they'll go, wow, this is neat, and then they'll go, but why should I go in a second time? So it's going to take us time to really develop the experiences and understand that relationship between a person and immersive experiences. And there will be a little bit of a bust, and there will be pushback, but it'll come back. Just like in 2000 when the dot-com bubble burst, the internet didn't go away. And the same thing will happen with VR. If the bubble bursts, VR is here to stay.
If you were to give advice to researchers in system sciences about the role that VR and AR can play within their work, what would that advice be?
Find some people to start experimenting with, and don't expect it to work. So I think that for a system scientist, if what they're doing is going to touch a human being or touch a population, which most of them will, VR, AR, mixed reality will be an avenue through which that person will interact with their information or their systems. And if they wait for other people to solve the sort of problems or solve the challenges, then what people end up creating may not be optimized for them. So I think they need to start partnering with artists and with creatives and doing crazy things. And even though it may not seem like a match made in heaven of computer scientists sort of working with artists, the reality is that those populations are needed to work together to try and get to the next level. So system science can't work in a bubble, entertainment can't work in a bubble, chemistry can't work in a bubble. There are no sort of disciplines anymore. We really need to learn to work completely and seamlessly transdisciplinary and have these crazy people doing crazy experiments.
In your presentation, you talked about how people from multiple disciplines came together as graduate, undergraduate students and devised solutions through their work together during the semester. That cross-disciplinary silo-busting approach may be encouraged at a place like USC, but do you find that landscape on other campuses? And what can they do to break down those silos, to reach out to art departments so that kind of interaction happens?
The silos exist at USC, believe me. As somebody who deals with administration, there are plenty of silos. And all organizations have silos. It's not just academia. The reason that this happens is that it really is grassroots, and it's the students coming together. The students have a joint interest. And they kind of fundamentally realize that in order to do the work, it can't just be a bunch of computer scientists doing it, that they need the cinema students and they need that type of lens into the world. And conversely, the cinema student and the artist realize that they need programmers and they need people that understand systems and are willing to experiment. So what we find is that we get these interdisciplinary student groups sort of despite what goes on at campus. So the students find the way around impediments, and what we try to do is provide an environment and provide a lab space where they can come together sort of, we don't care what school they're from. We just want them working on interesting things. And so if they can't do it at that university, they'll do it in their garage, they'll do it at home. My son is a student at USC, he's in the games program, he's writing code, but actually he's been...
Pardon me.
No problem. My son spends most of his time actually working on his own games at home, and he's got collaborators that he's found through other sort of gaming sites. So he has people that he works with, fellow students at USC, but he's found people across the country who he's either exchanging code with, or he's doing script doctoring because he's a pretty good writer. So he's found aspiring filmmakers that he does edits on. So there's an incredible ability for people to find collaboration that doesn't have to be where they physically are located. That said, the ability of students to come together in one physical space and work in real time is something that's important as well.
Okay. Is that not just for VR and AR and finding ways to make it work from a business standpoint and artistic standpoint, would that be applicable to all advances that we're seeking in our lives, that kind of cross-disciplinary approach?
I will put in a pitch for involving the artists and musicians in pretty much anything we're doing. Mm-hmm. So for instance, STEM has been a major push by the country for the last 10, 20 years. I think unfortunately it's often misguided. So that's why the term STEAM has been coined, that you have to have art as part of that. I think artists and musicians have been somewhat marginalized by our educational institutions, especially K through 12, and we have to bring them back into the fold because, again, they approach problems differently, and it's important to have that voice. So I think this interdisciplinary idea of bringing together from different disciplines, doesn't matter what the space is, I think you need those voices. The other thing that I advocate for is people to do crazy things and take up crazy hobbies. So for instance, my son, because I'm a musician, I have a bias. The rule was that as long as he lived in the house until he went into college, he had to study an instrument. He got to pick the instrument, but he had to study and had to practice. And it's not because I wanted him to be a professional musician. It's not that, you know, I was trying to live out some sort of dream that I was unable to fulfill. I just knew that music does things to your brain and makes you think in different ways that other types of learning and other types of study won't do. And so it's important, again, to have the sort of left brain, right brain. So I think we need to empower teams to do that, and then we need individuals to try and embrace that as well.
As somebody who has a doctorate in chemistry, who now finds themselves teaching VR, what advice do you have for young academics in this area in terms of how they should be guiding themselves?
Find something that you're passionate about and curious about, and then chase it. I loved chemistry, and I still love chemistry when I get to do it every once in a while. So we've got a new project with Ray Stevens from the Bridge Institute at USC. He's a chemist. He's a biochemist, actually. And we're going to do a world building project. So we're going to build a virtual cell, and we're going to do some VR and some game environment and whatnot. So it's great because I get to sort of reinvigorate my chemistry roots. And I love chemistry, but there was a point in the late 90s when I was a professor and the web started to come online. And so in 1995, I started creating websites. I taught myself to write HTML code and run servers, and it became obvious to me that this whole internet thing was going to be a profound change on how we could interact. And I saw the ability, as a professor, I would have 30 students in a class that I could sort of mentor and be involved in their educational process. Through the internet, I could scale that almost infinitely. So I became so interested in that I up and changed careers, and I actually resigned my faculty position before I had a job to go to. Because I gave 9 months notice because I needed to find another faculty member. But it really was, as much as I love chemistry, I saw that this fascinated me, all of this digital and internet stuff, and so I said, I want to go do it. And then my life has sort of ping-ponged back and forth since that, and now I'm sort of looking at, okay, what's the next thing that's going to get me all fired up? And for right now, this question of ethics in virtual environments and how we start to navigate that space, and how do we remain human in a world that's increasingly virtual. That to me is a fascinating topic, and I think something that has to be tackled, again, because the commercial sector is not going to do it. The commercial sector is going to sell you stuff, but buying things is not going to solve all your problems.
In your talk, you said the key challenge is to create an emulsion between the analog and digital aspects of our lives, and that we haven't quite reached that, though there are techniques to do so. How might that also be applicable for the system scientists who are looking toward the future and looking for ways to create?
Well, I was talking with one of the attendees, and he was talking about, he builds these back-end systems and he uses sensor networks. So it's a big data problem that they've got all of these sensor arrays and they pull this data in. But then it's a question of what do you do with it? So how do you make it meaningful? And he said it resonated, the idea of emulsion resonated with him because he's got all of these digits, but at some point he has to impact a human, or he has to impact another system. So we started talking about artificial intelligence and how do you start to craft these algorithms and make them meaningful. And I said, well, for me, an analogy there is improvisation in music. So if you think about AI needs to improvise. And because what musicians do, if I'm playing in a jazz combo and I take a solo, I'm collaborating with other musicians. We're all playing at the same time. We have some level of shared understanding, but we all have different backgrounds and come at it we all have different voices and different approaches. But in the moment, I'm creating something new, hopefully, if I'm doing something interesting. And we're all listening to each other, and we're all reacting to each other, and we're creating music and creating art if we're doing it right. To me, that's a great conceptual model for what artificial intelligence algorithms have to do and what sensor systems have to do. The algorithms have to be listening to the other algorithms because they have to be contextually relevant. And the way that you understand context is by listening. So this idea of, okay, I'm doing AI and I'm doing systems research in this, but I'm going to go talk to some jazz musicians and see how they improvise. And then by probing the mind of a musician and seeing, well, what are you thinking when you improvise? And a lot of them will say, I'm not thinking anything, I'm feeling. And then it's, okay, what are you feeling? What are you sensing? And they say, well, from the drums, I'm picking up these sort of rhythmic things, and then it changes over time. And so I think, again, that's bringing the artist and musician perspective in and just getting a different, it's thinking about your problem in a different way.
I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you
Good.
so much.
Absolutely, you're welcome.